The impact that both of them have made on this community cannot even be measured. I've watched them for years, and whether it's the theater or a fundraiser for children or charity, or privately helping someone, slipping somebody a couple $100 or taking over a payment for someone else. It's never ending, and the impact is huge. When you talk about some of the gold threads in this community, you're talking about the McGillicuddys.
Dennis McGillicuddy was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on December 10, 1941. He was the third child of a family of 8. His father, Cornelius, was the son of famed baseball patriarch Cornelius McGillicuddy I, a.k.a. Connie Mack, so named by the press in the 1920s.
The thing that was the most dominant part of our life is my grandfather was the owner and manager of the Philadelphia Athletics, the Major League Baseball team. And so we had pretty special times being able to go to the ballpark and watch ball games and see all the great players of the time. And we used to sit behind the dugout, third base dugout, and every game a ball would manage to be thrown over the dugout and happen to catch the roof and roll back down, so we'd get to take a ball home.
I can remember particularly Lou Graci, a pitcher for the A's back in the 40s and the early 50s. He'd stand and he'd throw a baseball up in the air, and he would let the ball hit the top of the dugout, which would then fall back into where we were. We'd go scrambling after that ball just like anybody else. We had a great time, I think. We each had our favorite ball players. Dennis had Ferris Fain was his hero. Michael, I think Eddie juiced, and was Sam Chapman, and we just loved going to the ballpark.
On November 15, 1941, a baby girl named Graci was born in Bogota, Colombia. She would become the love of Dennis's life. She was the oldest of 2 girls, her sister Gloria being 13 months her junior.
My mom and dad are both from Germany. My dad was in the import-export business in Germany, and then got the franchise for North, Central, and South America. And as a result, he was going through and installing hospitals all over the North and Central and South America. And then when Germany mobilized for war and they weren't exporting anymore, my mom and dad settled in Colombia rather than going back to Germany. And as a result, I was born there.
She attended good schools in Colombia, where she was taught English.
In Bogota, I went to a little school called the Yule School, which was an American school, and that's how I learned to speak English. And then we went to Barranquilla, I went to the Carl C. Parish, which was another American school that was run from a school system in New York.
Growing up in Bogota wasn't easy. Castro was practicing guerrilla warfare in Colombia at the time and had assassinated the president of Colombia.
It was so dangerous, and they were shooting in the streets and turning cars over. My father said, we've got to get out of here. So we packed up the family and we moved to Barranquilla, Colombia, which is right on the coast, and that's where we lived until we moved to the United States in 1951.
When she was 10 years old, her parents felt it was time to leave and moved to Miami. In Miami, she attended Miami Shores Elementary, then Horace Mann Junior High, and Miami Edison High School. She was a good student and made secretary-treasurer of the student council. She was even a calendar girl, featured as the Miss Wheel Club calendar's summer section.
I always wanted to be a cheerleader, but I just couldn't because I can't clap in rhythm. And I couldn't do a split, so I had to go choose something else.
In 1950, when Connie Mack I was 90 years old, he decided to retire from baseball. It had a profound impact on Dennis's future.
And there was I'd call it a minor conflict in the family as to who was going to run the team. And my grandfather said, because my Uncle Roy was older, from his generation, it was the idea of who the oldest was entitled to run the team. And at that point, we ended up moving to Florida because my dad said, look, if I'm not going to run the team, then I just as soon sell out. And So the rest of his brothers and my grandfather bought him out, and we moved to Fort Myers, Florida in 1950.
Dennis was a very good student. He went to Catholic parochial school through 8th grade, where he received an excellent education. By the time he attended public high school, he was already ahead of the public school system.
I had already taken 2 years of Latin, so I was taking 3rd and 4th year Latin when I was a 9th and 10th grader. When I got to high school, I concentrated more on sports and my studies, but still could keep up the good grades.
While he took time out for cars and girls, as we can see as young Dennis grips the wheel of this sporty roadster, he placed his main focus on athletics.
I played all 3 sports, lettered in football, baseball, and basketball.
He used to drive his father crazy. Before every pitch, he would do the sign of the cross. And, before every pitch.
Dennis wasn't sure about college. In fact, he had not even applied to schools by his senior year in high school.
It dawned on me one day that I had not applied to college. And it was very late in the school year. So about the only thing I could apply for that I could get into in that short a time was the University of Florida. And I'm very happy that I did, because I had unbelievably good time at Florida. And again, a consequence of my late application, there was no room in the dorms. Connie was living in an apartment with 2 other friends, and they needed a 4th in the apartment. So here I was, this new freshman, not having to live in a dorm with no restrictions on me, and I had a wonderful time my first year.
After graduating from Miami Edison Senior High School, Graci also made a decision to attend the University of Florida. Although it was not her first choice, she had considered Duke University, where they had a good language teaching reputation. Her aspirations were of being a government-related ambassador. She decided to go to the University of Florida because it was closer to her family. One night at a party, she met Dennis.
I was a Delta Gamma at University of Florida, and Dennis was an SAE. And at the time I was going with a fraternity brother of his. And one day, Dave and I broke up.
I asked her out the minute I heard that she was had broken up with her boyfriend. Our first date was magical. We hit it off so well that when we finally realized it was 3 o'clock in the morning, we had to sneak her back into the sorority house. And back in those days, that was a pretty big deal if she got caught. And but we were successful in getting her back in without the house mother finding out. And for me, it was just like being knocked over with a bowling ball. That first night, I just knew I was in love and that this would be the person that I would marry.
8 months later, we were married. We had to wait until August because we both had to start our senior year, and we both had to work that summer. So we got married on August 18th, 1962.
It was a good party. I can remember, really, we didn't want to leave. We left very late. We were going to the Bahamas, to Nassau on our honeymoon. And I remember hopping in our car at the time, and about halfway to the airport, and we had all of the writing on the side of the car and on the windows and the cans dragging in the back.
And we were sputtering because they did something
and
with
they
the spark plugs.
disconnected 1 or 2 of the spark plugs. But what we didn't know about and didn't start experiencing until about halfway from Graci's mom and dad's house to the Miami International Airport was that they had put a whole block of blue cheese on the manifold in the car. And so we had to not only drive smelling like that, but leave the car in the airport for 4 or 5 days and come back to that nice smell. I guess the marriage has been so great, blue cheese is one of my favorite things to have.
Settling into married life and going to school had its challenges. In order to help out with the finances, Graci started teaching while Dennis was in law school. Teaching jobs were scarce, but she managed to find one in Brooker, Florida.
I taught the 5th and 6th grade combination. And because of my languages, the principal had me teach Spanish to the 1st and 2nd graders. There were four classrooms, a 1st and 2nd grade classroom, a 3rd and 4th, and a 5th and 6th. and the principal taught the 7th and 8th. So we only had 73 students in all, and it was awesome. I taught Spanish to the whole school. I developed a reading program that I then taught to the whole school, well, the older kids, the 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th grades. So it, I loved that part.
Dennis entered law school at the University of Florida. He excelled in law school, editing the Florida Law Review, and graduated second in his class. It was also here that he met a man who would soon impact his life in a major way.
I was the chairman of the Student Evaluation Committee for the law school, and I went to Barry Silverstein was the professor's name, and asked him to be the faculty advisor to the Student Evaluation Committee. Out of that, a friendship grew, and I ended up taking like 4 courses from him, and always did very well. And until the last course that I took from him, my senior year, and I ended up getting a B. And I'd gotten straight A's from him. And he, years later, told me that when he had graded that paper, he remembered that grading just by the numbers, that I got an A or an A minus. I was on the border, but like an A. And you have to know Barry's personality, but he said he looked at the student's name to see if he's going to make any adjustments for participation in class and that sort of thing. And he says, you know, that McGillicuddy, he's got my number. He said, I'm going to give him a B+. And the consequence of that was that I graduated number 2 in my class and not number 1.
Their life would soon change. Their son Dennis was born on May 3rd, 1965, and Graci became a full-time mom.
Dennis said, oh, this is great. You can go back and teach in September. And I went, no. I'm going to be back then you didn't say a stay-at-home mom. I said, no, there's no way I can leave my babies. We struggled. We ate a lot of pot pies and redeemed lots of top value stamps for all the and S&H stamps. Back then they used to give you stamps when you bought things in grocery stores. But we managed.
Dennis graduated law school in 1966. He accepted a job clerking with Judge McCrae in Jacksonville. The next year, Dennis joined one of the state's leading law firms, and the family moved to Lakeland, where they decided to build a house and have a second child. Daughter Allison was born on April 24, 1968. Life was starting to balance out, and the couple seemed to be settling in for a good life with the law. And then, Dennis received a phone call from his old law professor, Barry Silverstein.
And said, I'd like you to come up and talk to me about joining Steve McVoy and me in this cable television company. I think we got a tiger by the tail, and I'd love to have you join us, so would you come up? I knew deep down, the minute I hung up from the phone call, that I was going to do that. And it wasn't because I didn't want to practice law, but the excitement of doing something like this just grabbed me.
Every morning I used to fix him breakfast, and every morning before he left to go to work, he'd throw it up. And it was very stressful. He was doing things that he'd never done before. And he left this wonderful plush office, which he had worked for in Lakeland, their office was a converted tractor farm in Alachua County. Wasn't it in Alachua? Mm-hmm. And then he had a bare light bulb that was the lighting, hanging down from the ceiling, and there was no air conditioning. So I went and I bought him a fan and bought him a lamp. It was hard, but it was exciting.
Back to Gainesville they went. They began by building cable systems in smaller, rural communities in northern Florida. Their partner, Stephen McVoy, developed construction techniques and electronic techniques which enabled them to bring in signals from very far away. So it was economical to build in communities the size of 1,000 people. In a few years, they branched into Alabama and Georgia.
The business kept looking to be better and better, and changes in regulation and changes in technology with satellites. All that's history now, but I was right there in the middle of that, watching that happen. And it was a very, very exciting career to be involved in not only our business, which grew, but also in an industry that grew and changed over the years.
Dennis was involved in the legal side of the business, appearing before the Federal Communications Commission hearings and congressional hearings. He also talked to cities about franchises and negotiating the terms of those franchises.
In the early years, when I was going after a franchise in Quitman, Georgia, the city council was meeting outside washing the fire truck. And I helped do that while we talked about the cable franchise. And then several years later, I'm appearing before the New Orleans City Council with hundreds of people in the audience. So I've had a varied experience with city councils. And also cable television is very capital intensive. And so another thing that I did in the business was to negotiate the loans for raising the capital to put our facilities in.
The type of business they were in permitted them to live anywhere. In December 1970, all the partners agreed to move the headquarters to Sarasota. While Dennis was busy building a major cable corporation, Graci was busy in Sarasota raising their 2 children and becoming involved with the community. Their son, Denny, developed a love of swimming and science into a career, first attending the courses available at Mote Marine Lab in Sarasota. He is now a scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Massachusetts, off Cape Cod. During those growing years, Graci became a serious tennis player. In 1976, she made the semifinals of the Manatee Junior College Scholarship Tournament. She and young Denny played in the U.S. Open and the Nationals of the Equitable Tennis Challenge. And in 1999, Graci played on the 50s League in the National Championship in Palm Springs, California. When not raising her children or playing tennis, Graci was active in the community. Her first big event was the Cartoon Classic Gala.
Marjorie Northack came to me and said, Dick Brown's wife has passed away and he is having a terrible time dealing with it. And he wants to do some kind of a memorial event for her, a fundraiser for the hospital because he felt so grateful. So I met Dick Brown and Sandy Snyder, and we then did a major fundraiser which was called Joan Brown Cartoon Classic Gala that raised money for the Sarasota Memorial Hospital, and we did that for quite a few years, and then Dick Brown passed away, and there was the Dick Brown and Joan Brown Cartoon Classic Gala, and I think that was the very, very beginning of all then once you are on one committee, then all of a sudden you're on every committee in town.
It wasn't long before Graci convinced Dennis to become involved.
For me, the first time was a Sunday afternoon that Graci drugged me to a luncheon to meet people from Florida Studio Theater. I wanted to be at home. It was my one day off, and I wanted to be home watching a football game. And so I was there reluctantly. And in the course of that meeting, it was a social event, and the development director for Florida Studio Theater was making a pitch, and I wasn't paying very much attention. And Richard Hopkins, the artistic director for Florida Studio Theater then and still now, began to talk. And as a consequence of that, and I can't explain why, I just made a connection. I started paying attention, and I said, I want to be involved with this man, and I want to support what he's doing. And that was the beginning of I think the first thing that I ever did here in Sarasota.
From this point, many organizations have felt the benefit of having Dennis and Graci as supporters and advisors. In 1998, Dennis and his partners determined it was time to sell their company to a larger group. This provided Dennis more time to enjoy golf. It also provided the Sarasota community an opportunity to utilize the talents and expertise of Dennis and Graci more fully.
There's a quote that I love, and it's about genius, and it is that genius is not intellect, it's someone by whose presence we are changed. And I certainly think with Dennis and Graci, their presence is changing. They are champions of the theater. They champion the theater financially, they champion the theater in our programming, whether it's children's programming or scholarships. They will say to us, put us where you need us. Where do you need the help? Not what's going to make us look good, or where do you need us? That's where we want you to put the finances or what we need. We're engaged with them not only as champions of the theater and its growth, but in a more reflective way, in the champions of the soul and the heart of the theater and its relationship to our city.
Without Dennis, unquestionably Florida Studio Theater would not be what it is today. Dennis appeared on the scene and served as a board member for a number of years. When he became the president of Florida Studio Theater, the theater began a major turnaround and a growth cycle that is more than a decade long now. And it's due to his extraordinary talents as a board president. He can bring people together of diverse points of view and find common ground among a dozen people sitting around a board table better than anyone I've ever seen.
Dennis and I have been on the Winefest board really together for 11 years. He is involved with a particular, in fact, the most important committee I seem to think that we have with Winefest, and that's where the money goes. It's one thing to raise the money, it's another thing to be sure that the money goes directly where it is, in fact, crucially needed. Dennis sits with a body of 8 other people. They review 50 to 60 grant applications each year and then have the hard decision to make a recommendation to the board of directors on which charities they recommend should receive money from our programs.
I think Dennis and Graci are both extremely brilliant individuals, and they understand what a long-term commitment is all about, and they work at it. And we all know that marriage and our lives together are something that does take a little bit of work. They understand compromise, they understand the beauty of what it is that they have, and they treasure it. And they treasure it not only through one another, but through their children and their participation together in events and programs in the community.
Graci has been a member of our board of directors for over 10 years now. I've been with the agency for 10 years, and she was with us when I came to the agency. Dennis and Graci both have contributed countless amounts of their resources to our agency. Of course, contributions, financial contributions that go into the tens of thousands of dollars, but more than that. And I think in a lot of ways more important than that is the emotion and the heart and the energy that Graci and Dennis bring to the work that they give in the community.
Of course, with the advent of Brother Connie Mack III's entry into politics, the McGillicuddys became active in the Republican Party on a local, state, and national level.
Graci and Dennis have had an extraordinary impact on our community, whether it's political and fighting for the right causes that they so believe in that'll make a difference in our community, our state, our nation, or issues that impact children. That's really at the center of their heart. Or even the arts, and they both had independently extraordinary vision and impact on those arenas, which are all so important to the fabric of Sarasota.
There is no doubt Dennis and Graci McGillicuddy have impacted this community for the better. We ask them their advice for those who follow.
If you can make a difference in someone's life and just make it a little bit better, and it doesn't take a lot. It's so rewarding.
Find the thing that catches your heart, and that's where you'll make a difference because you put your heart into it. And I would follow up with what Graci said. It isn't the big things. I think it's the little things that can make a difference in people's lives. And so if I were advising, and I have said this to my son and daughter, get involved with something you can connect to And it doesn't matter what it is. If you do it, you're going to affect people.